I'm Andrés Acebo. I'm the interim president here at NJCU University. Hudson County born and bred, proud native of Union City, and honored to have this responsibility. Listen, I'm first generation, right? Son of Cuban immigrants. So growing up in a really dynamically rich and diverse community, something that I think growing up I took for granted, particularly as you enter spaces and places that are more foreign. But I had a really dynamic experience growing up, really civically engaged from a very young age, really involved in school extracurriculars, robust relationships with friends and family. I'm the oldest of three. I have two younger sisters. I'm married to what many would say my grammar school sweetheart, because we've known each other for so long. She's another Union City native and actually a proud alum of NJCU University, who teases me about how it took me longer to get accepted by this institution than it did her. And I'm the father of three little boys, 10, 9, and 4, who are the love of my life. We live in one of the most diverse areas in the country, dare I say, like even the world. An incredibly densely populated region also. I think nearly half of the county's population is foreign born. So it brings that kind of fresh perspective and that grit and hustle that I think is hard to emulate outside of our environment, right? Which is every single day there are people that wake up in this community, in these communities, who are making something out of their lives, starting sometimes again, that remind me of my own parents and my family's journey. And I think that that's kind of a gift and a blessing in itself, to be like almost immersed and have your adolescence shaped in that environment and become and awaken as a young adult in that environment too. The diversity of experiences and backgrounds, I think, has imprinted upon me like a kind of a global perspective, long before I ever had the privilege of being able to travel the world, right? Like the world came to me in many ways, and I think that that's what's so beautiful about Hudson County. You literally can experience distinct Indian cultures and South Asian cultures, really confronting the realities that sometimes get taken for granted in outside communities, right? Which is like the Hispanic community in particular, how vibrant it is, that it is not a monolith. I think it was just a privilege to have been born in this time and place, and has shaped my trajectory. It was everything. I mean, so my father came on a raft from Cuba at the age of 18. I literally have the compass that he used what will be 60 years ago this summer. He didn't pass grade school, right? My mom only obtained a high school diploma. And so imprinted upon me from a very young age was their teachings of that if you study and an education, those are things that no government, no person could ever take away from you. It was really linked to me about education as a key component to mobility, right? I'm the son of a mom who cleaned other people's houses, right, when I was little, and a father who waited on tables, right? And their son gets to go to college and law school and be the first to accomplish a lot of things because they dared to be the first to do something. And so college and higher education was incredibly important in my household. I think there was less of a premium put on what I studied, which was unique, I think, in my background, because I think that first generation immigrant experience is you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. My mom teases me that I chose to be a lawyer just because I'd like to fight and argue. But that was, again, something that was ingrained in me about the value proposition of being self-sustaining. And I think the greatest privilege that my parents gave me is the fact that they recognized, and it was enforced upon me from a very young age, of the opportunities that they were deprived of because they didn't have that access. And so I was very conscientious from a very young age about the opportunities that I was seeking, but the responsibility that I had to seek them. I entered places and spaces that didn't contemplate people with my background or my experience entering them. And imposter syndrome is a very real thing. People ask me if I struggle with anxiety, and I half jokingly say I don't struggle with it. It comes quite easy to me. And a lot of that, I think, is because you're entering places that you never saw people like you in. Self-doubt will creep in, and that imposter syndrome has a way of getting magnified. But the antidote to that, right, is one that is sometimes has to be self-prescribed, and it's have a sense of responsibility when you enter those places, and that you bring your community with you. And when you do that, I promise you, and even in your own ventures, right, and the responsibility of being an ambassador for your community, when you take that approach, you never walk into a room alone, right? You bring your abuela, you bring your mom, you bring your sisters and your brothers, or your friends. Those stories you carry with you, and you outnumber, in Hudson County fashion, most people in the room. And I promise you this, you give it time, you reflect on those experiences, and you look around those rooms, you no longer question how you got there, you start wondering how other people got there. Think about like our community's experiences, like the challenges that I've professionally experienced or personal experiences, pale in comparison to my family or my parents or grandparents, leaving everyone they knew and loved to start their lives all over again. Like at 18, I was off to college and my dad was getting on a raft, right? Like that juxtaposition of like, it's hard to imagine, feeling inadequate when someone else sacrificed that much, and that the things you walk through this world with, some of the values are ones that you somehow through osmosis have inherited, right? Because of someone else's struggles. There's an endurance that you build with time, right? And you train yourself, and you get lightheaded when you're reaching different altitudes, right? And that shakes your sense of self. But being grounded in community, I think, helps you move and confront those insecurities. And I was, again, privileged to have a family that was incredibly supportive, and a community, right? Unnamed faces and people who cared about where my story began and opened doors for me, who sent the elevator down for me, right? So there's a responsibility and a debt that I think you carry that you never get to fully pay back. Right? You have a responsibility to at least strive to pay it forward. Like, it's important to me that I interact with students on a daily basis. There's a lot of work that happens behind that desk, but there's a lot of eyes that you have to lock with in order to give it meaning and recenter yourself with your purpose and your focus. And so, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree about the importance of representation. But someone like me, like right now, right, and fortunately that will change with time in the coming months. In fact, actually, St. Peter's, your alma mater, will be welcoming its first Hispanic president, which is something exciting for our community, right, to see that kind of representation amplified and doubled down on. But I will tell you, like, for the better part of the last year and a half, finding myself, as unlikely as it was, becoming the only Hispanic leading any institution of higher education in New Jersey, and the first one in more than 13, 14 years to do so. Being the youngest known to do it, right, is a different dynamic as well. I found those to be strengths, but I've always candidly said those are things that I can't control. I had no say in what family I was born into or when I was born, but those are gifts that I try to bring onto this campus because it's an enhanced perspective. And as much as representation matters, it matters also when you serve that community, because I see my story reflected back at me every single day. When I speak to our students, right, solid comfort food, but I know exactly what it feels like when you're hungry and the only thing you have to eat is rice and fried eggs, right? Again, solid food, right? I also know what it's like, an empty belly and a starved mind, right? And I know those impediments. I know what it's like to have working parents who can't sit with you and figure out how to fill out a FAFSA form, right? I know what it's like to have friends and loved ones that are undocumented, who live almost in the shadows and their promise is curtailed, and that we as a society are robbed of their full talent and their full selves because of how we marginalize that experience. And I also know, in very tangible ways, the value of a degree, right? And that papelito that you get, and sometimes you don't earn in 4 years. Sometimes life disproportionately happens to folks in our communities, and academic journeys are not linear. And there are detours, some by design, right, and some unanticipated. And being culturally attentive and responsive to that is incredibly important to me. Because the people that crisscross this campus, like the ones that I love and care for, are people that are pursuing something incredibly noble, a shot, right, at a better life. And I think that dynamic is something that you have to breathe life into, because there are days that are much less glamorous, right? Not everything is pomp and circumstance. There's hard work. There's distressing realities of any job. There are also the quiet indignities that you have to suffer in any position of leadership, particularly when you come from an underserved and underrepresented community, that you represent perhaps an achievement and an ascension for your community, but that doesn't come without pitfalls and forces that seek to hold it back or threatened by it sometimes, right? And so there's a reality that sets in, which is knowing your why is far more important than figuring out your how. So I'm new to this role, right? And I'm certainly not the archetypal pick. I recognize that wholeheartedly, that I was an unorthodox pick to be at the helm of an institution of higher education, and a public one at that. I think is the relatability, right? That our students are seen, that they feel that there's leadership in a university that cares about where their stories begin, that we purposely seek out to meet them where they are, that we confront things like food insecurity and housing insecurity, because those are obstacles, right? That our students persist, and setbacks are not ones that are naturally just because of academic rigor. It's life, right? Like when you got to care for mommy and papi or abuela, right? Or younger siblings, and that means that you have to drop from full-time status to part-time. You know, there is that grit, that Hudson County grit, and that resiliency that I think, coupled with a higher education, makes you a formidable force in our society, and a critical one. We have a friend, Ryan Haygood, who runs the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. Last year, we presented him with an honorary degree, and at commencement, he spoke incredibly eloquently, as he often does, and words that have ingrained with me is that we're living in unprecedented times, and so we need unprecedented people. And I can tell you wholeheartedly that this privilege of a lifetime of leading this institution at this particular moment of time, that I engage with unprecedented people all the time. And my charge has been to amplify their stories. Everyone unequivocally knows who this campus serves, that we are the state's oldest Hispanic serving institution. We have the largest percentage of Hispanic identifying students. We are a majority minority, underrepresented, underserved campus, with the most socioeconomically diverse student population. The median household income of our students is $42,000 a year. And this institution, I like to think, is being better served because there are leaders that can relate to that experience, so that's not hypothetical to me. I didn't have to take a PhD course, right, in higher education and leadership. I've been gifted an honorary PhD in life's hardships that I've been able to bear witness to because of the community that gave me an opportunity. And the students, right, that I'm privileged to serve are top of mind because they are that why that I talked about before. Because someone cared about where my story began. And now I'm in a position to care about where someone else's story begins and to try to break down systemic barriers. Just in the last year, we refreshed our mission and vision as an institution. We're the only university to have an official Spanish language version for both, not a translated one. That was important to me. We launched an academic master plan, the first of its kind, that really talks about being a student-ready institution. We just launched our strategic enrollment plan. A lot of firsts for an institution because, a community of primeros doesn't deserve anything less. What I'm most proud of the strategic enrollment and the academic master plan is that there's ways of doing it, right? There are institutions that will pay top dollar to fancy consulting firms. That was not my approach. My approach was to really harness and embrace the culture of this campus, to pay tribute to it and to honor its legacy while trying to also redirect it, right? Which is sometimes painful, right? To do towards its greater promise of what I think it needs to be, right? Leaders are not defined by their followers. They're defined by the fact that they dare to do something first, and enter rooms first, and confront challenges first. And that's what this campus is endeavoring to do. And we brought community stakeholders, our students, our faculty, our staff together so that the product would be proprietary, that there was buy-in, not just in the end result, but in the process. And that's how you sustain something that is meaningful and long-term sustainable, right? Is that people believe in the product and in the mission because they help author it. And that's what I said from the very beginning when I took the charge and was privileged to accept this role, which is that we're on the precipice of our centennial as an institution in 2027. And we are authoring, I think, the most remarkable chapter in our institution's history, one that, economic downturns, recessions, and global pandemics couldn't make us break, right? I'm a firm believer, and I tend to use a lot of metaphors, so I apologize, but I'm a firm believer, right, that they're the signs of truth. And the signs of truth, right, are things that you evidence in the natural world, that, the strongest steel is forged in the hottest of fires. This institution and its people have been tested with some unanticipated challenges, but by emulating the resolve and the resiliency and the grit of the community that we're privileged to serve, and enshrining that in kind of a charter as of a mission and a vision for this place with strategic purpose, I think, the sky's the limit for the things that this campus and its community and the community that we, again, are privileged to serve will be able to see realized. I didn't do anything. I get a lion's share of the credit because of the seat that I get to sit in, but this campus did it, right? And that's what I'm most proud of. Like, I got to galvanize a community and set a course and a vision, and roll up my sleeves, right, and engage in the late nights and the early mornings. But any person that you meet who's in a position of leadership who claims to have done it themselves is unworthy of the role that they're privileged to hold. So I have to give a very necessary shout out to the community of students and faculty and legislators, right, and state officials that came together, who answered my call, right? I recognize that I raised my hand and said presente at a time where a lot of people were ready to quit on this place, and I think I've been accused of being too passionate about the cause. And my response to maybe answer the first part of the question of how we got here, I think, is that there were far too many people who weren't passionate enough about who we serve. And it's not something that happened overnight. There are macro things that are conflating, right, that are systemic and industry-wide challenges to higher education. There are less graduating high school seniors because of the recession in 2007, 2008. Something that in higher ed we call the enrollment cliff that we're all heading towards. So the traditional high school, college-bound student is a shrinking market, and those are things that have stressed the financial model of institutions of higher education, particularly ones that are so reliant on tuition and fees, right, to operate. I think particularly public institutions of higher education have been chronically underinvested in. Public higher education is not something that is sexy to campaign on. We talk a lot about student loan debt. Leadership, again, matters there, right? Like, I'm a college president and I'm still paying my student loans, right? So I can relate to that experience. That's probably not something that many of my peers know the sting of, right? Of what it means to delay starting a family and buying a house, or the decisions you make about your first job, and being really mindful about that our generation, right, and yours, the reality is that the job that you graduate, that you enter into upon graduation isn't necessarily the one you're going to have in 5 years, right? So careers take different shifts and dynamics. And so I think the lack of reorienting to that truth are things that compounded some of the challenges for this institution, that it wasn't just exclusively financial. Like, I think we deserve a lot of credit for how we've managed the financial shortfalls, right? There is a forecasted nearly over $20 million operating shortfall that we've closed in less than a year, right? Making very painful decisions, a lot of pain and sacrifices by a lot of people. But there was also a deficit of hope, right? Of meaning and purpose, of what it means for this place to exist, of what our value proposition was, who we serve. I'd like to see that when the things that I speak to are things that are now being talked about on other campuses, right? I think imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and NJCU is getting imitated a lot lately. but not replicated. And so that's something that I think led to those challenges, but it's also been in confronting that and honoring who we are is how we've rebounded. That this was never about preserving the status quo. The status quo does not serve our community well. It has not. I've embraced the disruption, right? And to me, the goal has been to be a disruptor as well, and highlight things that are maybe uncouth at times for many, about things that have plagued our community for too long, and to confront and seek the fellowship and communion of people who showed up for ribbon cuttings when things were great and disappeared when things weren't, right? And I'm Hudson County through and through. And so I don't shy away from challenges or fights, especially ones worthy of and necessary of having. And so that's, I think, how we've confronted this, is by really embracing and harnessing our culture, a distinctive culture that our community, for too long, its light was dimmed. And so I think before you confront any financial deficits, you have to confront that deficit of hope. I think what you find on this campus is that the folks that work here, by and large, I mean, there's a lot of alums that come back and join our team. There are folks who are very deliberate and intent on service, of embracing a culture of continuous improvement. I get asked all the time, when will this work be done, of like making this place better? And my response is always, that work never ends. We're an organization, if it is worth existing, has to evolve, right? We're not defined by brick and mortar. We're defined by the people that we care for and that we have a responsibility to champion. And those stories permeate all our spaces and places on this campus. It can be something as simple as the glance that someone gives someone walking from one class to another, or the encouraging smile of a stranger, or just the fellowship and communion of recognizing that you're in a community and a campus where your story isn't unique, right? Where the world will make you feel incredibly small. And there's a tendency that we seek sometimes to shrink ourselves so that we fit into the environment that we find ourselves in. And at NJCU, something that we are unapologetic about, and that we've enshrined again in our strategic purpose and focus, is that you don't have to change your zip code to find your promise, that you can grow in place and be robust, and that this is where you can launch the rest of your life. That I care about, again, how your academic journey begins, but I also appreciate the twists and turns that it'll take for it to come to a conclusion. So we've done things like committed to a pledge that there will never be another canceled course on this campus, right? Of the frustrations that takes. If I only have 6 students registered for a class, but all 6 students need that class in order to graduate, that class is going, right? The idea of accommodating schedules, right? Because people work, right? Like our goal, again, at a time when I think there's a diminishing return on the investment and almost a myopic focus from many higher ed leaders to just cultivate and chase the so-called college-ready student. NJCU is marking the path of access and equity are aligned, and recognizing the confrontation that sometimes invites, because equity does feel like oppression to privilege, right? Like when you ask for an investment, folks, right, that don't understand these experiences don't embrace that necessarily. But this campus is signaling by amplifying the stories of our students and putting them at the center of what is so worthy of the investment. I think the pandemic, like it did for a lot of people in our community, shook me. Right? I lost a lot of loved ones. Folks that certainly before their time, right, or anything that could be reasonable. Our youngest was only about 6 or 7 months old, and at the height of the lockdown was hospitalized for weeks, and was gravely ill. And that's a way to kind of shake you, right, at your core. And it tested kind of those first generation expectations that I had for myself and career-wise, where I made partner incredibly early on in my career. And I think kind of a theme of my life, right, most Hamiltonian. And that's where like I feel like I've lived my life, like I'm running out of time. I think that's kind of that immigrant grit also, right, of first generation of like wanting my parents to fully bask in the life that I've tried to curate right? And of opportunities that I've sought to seize, of rejecting the premise of that you got to wait your turn. That because, as you both know, right, and being a product of this community, that age is nothing but a number, right? We're privileged that because of our inherited struggle and sacrifice, there's a lot of life packed in a short amount of years because of the experiences that we endure and bear witness to. And so that was an inflection point to me of pursuing an opportunity that made me feel more tethered to my community and to my story. I got in private practice an opportunity to be returned to Hudson County, working with Mayor Rodriguez at the time in West New York, being counsel to the Elizabeth Public Schools, right? Like that kind of work really sustained me. I got involved with a not-for-profit that I'm on the board of, the Cuban American Alliance for Leadership and Education. We're celebrating our 10th year this year, where we've given out more than $200,000+ in scholarships to first-generation students, launched a leadership development program, done impact study trips. Being able to host a lot of that on our NJCU campus has been kind of a joy. While I was in private practice, where friends told me about an opportunity to join the university. The then general counsel, who had been here for about 18 years, had expressed his intent to retire in the coming year. So there was a pathway for me to take on that kind of role, joining first as the chief of staff and assistant counsel. Certainly never imagined becoming the president a year and a half later. And my faith is also incredibly important to me, and it's something that I prayed a lot on. And I believe God makes us be useful. And I like to think that I've been put to good use. In short, we've stabilized the institution, and I think in an incredibly remarkable way, given not just what we've done, but the speed with which we've accomplished the things we've done, right? Deliberately, with urgency. In early February, Moody's, one of 3 global rating agencies, improved our outlook from negative to stable. And for context, this institution had previously been downgraded 5 times in 5 years. And so the fact that less than 20 months after declaring fiscal exigency, that this institution would reach that level of affirmation from a global rating agency is nothing short of impressive, and the campus deserves a lot of credit for that. I take pride in the fact that the way we've led was a marker of that elevation in the outlook to stable. Moody's went as far as to commend the credibility of management, right, and the stewardship of our finances and our strategies that we've deployed. That doesn't mean that this institution is not without more systemic structural challenges, but ones that I think we're at the ready to confront with partnership, with the state being a great partner, and that our legislative, there's an entire freshman class of assembly members representing the Hudson delegation, many of whom have been dear friends long before I was in this role, who have agreed and co-signed on the pledge, right, to make this place not just survive, but to thrive. And we're going to continue leading in the way of doing something transformational, that preserving status quo is not an option, that this institution will evolve as we enter our 2nd century of existence. We will look different, we will function differently, but unequivocally and stubbornly, I will put it, in unmeasured terms, dedicated to the population we serve, anchoring ourselves in Hudson County, tethering ourselves to the experiences of our students and elevating their stories, and that I think will yield greater promise, fulfillment for this institution for years and decades to come. I will say that I've been humbled by the support of our community. Like when you have students talk about, like that I understand struggle, right? Like I can't think of a greater compliment, and one that I never thought I'd be given, right? Like, or one that I would appreciate as much as I did, like that to be told that I understand, right? I think leaders often are looked to have the answers, and you can't have answers without understanding circumstances and challenges. And so I'm grateful that I've been able to communicate, at least at times, as effectively enough to make people feel seen. And so there's a lot more work to do, right? I'm not done. And if I'm privileged to serve longer It's one that I will honor. But however or whenever my term comes to an end, I will be adamant about this, that it will have been the greatest privilege of my professional life, one that is very closely aligned, short of convincing my wife to fall in love with me and being, my kid's dad. This is up there, right, of like being a son of this community who, was gifted privilege and responsibility to lead. Is something that I will cherish, and until my final hour, my final second, I will seek to honor it. Well, I will say this: don't underestimate the importance of telling your story and your experience. I'm a firm believer in that. That like people will feel like they can when they know you did, right? And to me, it's like, and we live in a culture of instant gratification, right? Like, and stories and reels, right, that will only curate the highlights. The more you talk about the struggle, the more palpable success and achievement become, right? The more attainable it feels, right? Like if I've purposely chosen to be very direct about my personal experiences and challenges with anxiety and imposter syndrome and kind of the plight of being first gen, right? But the blessings that come with it too. And I think when you do that, people realize that we spend an inordinate amount of time living in our own heads, right? And that we manifest our own realities. And I think the more we dispel, this image of perfection and overnight success, right? That we got to embrace the twists and turns that make our lives so beautiful. Warts and all, painful realities, right? The more you share that, I think the more people will gravitate. I think there's nothing more authentic than someone who relishes the opportunity to share journey. Like, I think human beings were storytellers, right? And it's like, that's how civilization was born. And I think that's what we confronted during the pandemic, right? I think that's what's so beautiful, that's what sparked in you in the midst of social distancing and isolation was, right, to like embrace storytelling and culture and connect us to each other again. It's like, before we build civilizations, we huddled around fires, right? And talked to each other. And I think that's it wasn't those flames that kept us warm, right? It was human contact and proximity. So I want to applaud you guys for highlighting our culture, right? Of our stories and our community and our people.